Last night I warned about the dangers of a constitutionally entrenched Indigenous voice to the Parliament. Your response to that editorial, and the response more generally to Minister Ken Wyatt's speech to the National Press Club, shows that the government is asking for trouble if it takes this idea of a separate Indigenous voice further. Now, to be fair to the Minister and to the government, Ken Wyatt has not said that the government is committed to a constitutionally entrenched Indigenous voice. All the government is committed to is seeking to advance Indigenous recognition in the Constitution, although what's meant by this is not defined. And it won't go ahead, Wyatt stressed, if there's no consensus for change. But the trouble is that the only proposal to advance Indigenous recognition for the moment is this contentious idea of an Indigenous voice. And if there's no consensus sufficient to pass a referendum, the Minister said that the Parliament could seek to legislate it anyway. In some ways, I have to say, that would be worse, because it would be an attempt to sneak in, by the back door of Parliament, a change that the government knows it would never be supported by the people at a referendum. Let's be clear here. Like everyone, like most Australians, I want a better life for Aboriginal people, and I've always supported policies that would get the kids to school, the adults in work, and make communities safer. And if there's a way to acknowledge Indigenous people in the Constitution via, say, perhaps a change to the preamble that doesn't create two classes of citizen and which doesn't create new rights, I could be persuaded to support it too. But I could never be persuaded to divide Australians by race or to treat Australians differently on the grounds of race. Indeed, I thought the whole course of our history and the whole course of human progress was to avoid distinctions based on race, colour, gender or creed. Why should there be a special body created by the Constitution or the Parliament, elected by one race of Australians for one race of Australians, but with a voice that could so easily become a veto over the Parliament, which is elected by everyone for everyone? After coming so far on the reconciliation path, why would we do this to ourselves? Why would we start having race-based bodies in our system of government on the grounds that only an Aboriginal person can decide what's best for Aboriginal people? We would never say that only migrants can make decisions for migrants and that only women can make decisions for women. As it stands today, we already have a voice for Indigenous people, thanks to people like Ken Wyatt and Linda Burney in the House of Representatives, and Pat Dodson and Malarndirri McCarthy, who are in the Senate. That place is the Australian Parliament, where these Australians of Indigenous heritage were elected fair and square like everybody else. Isn't that the strongest combination of voice and equality? I said last night that Ken Wyatt's speech yesterday felt like an ambush. Now, I've worked on Indigenous issues for over 10 years with the Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, who had and still has a very genuine commitment going back almost 3 decades in this area. So I watch it closely. Now, the only party that talked about putting an Indigenous voice into the Constitution during the last election was the Labor Party. The Liberal Party's view during the election was actually Malcolm Turnbull's view, that it didn't support something that could turn into a third chamber of the Parliament. So what's the Liberal Party doing now, talking about implementing a Labor policy? Worse, they can't get it up via referendum. They'll just, ram it through the Parliament anyway? With yesterday's announcement, if the government isn't careful, it could easily end up dividing itself, angering its supporters, and working with the Labor Party to put in place a policy that would jeopardise Australia's hard-won social cohesion. The Prime Minister is a grounded man, and he's already shown us he's politically whip-smart. I think it's about now he takes Ken Wyatt aside and reminds him that being Minister for Indigenous Australians does not mean to the exclusion of everyone else.